The day the giant bride arrived at Black Hollow Ranch, the land itself seemed to hold its breath, because no one married Elias Crow for love. Not at 70 years old, not with hands hardened like old oak roots and eyes that had buried more men than he could remember, and certainly not when his name carried more weight than gold across 3 counties. Elias Crow was the last living pillar of a ranch built with blood, drought-broken backs, and a silence that swallowed screams. And when his black horse stopped in front of the house with the young woman seated stiffly behind him, every ranch hand froze, because the rumors were finally true. The old rancher had taken a bride, and she was nothing like the fragile women people expected. She was tall, broad-shouldered, striking in a raw, almost frightening way, with storm-dark eyes and a posture that suggested she had survived more than she ever spoke about. Her name was Clara Bell, though no one dared say it out loud at first, because from the moment her boots touched the dirt of Black Hollow, it was clear she wasn't here by choice. She was here by decision, his decision. And in the low sun of the western evening, Elias dismounted slowly, his joints aching, his face unreadable, while Clara stood there like a statue carved from endurance, staring at the ranch house that would now be her cage, her shelter, her battlefield, and her fate. Years earlier, Elias Crow had lost everything that mattered except land. His sons died in separate accidents, one under a collapsing barn roof, another in a river swollen by pride and rain. His wife withered away quietly like grass in winter, and the Crow bloodline, once feared and respected, was ending with him, and that terrified him more than death itself, because men like Elias didn't fear dying. They feared being forgotten. And so when the town council suggested marriage, not for love but for legacy, he agreed without hesitation, because legacy was the only language he still spoke. Clara came from a broken settlement at the edge of nowhere, raised among laborers and loss, known for her strength, her height, and her silence. And when her family's debts crushed them beyond hope, the offer from Elias Crow felt less like a proposal and more like a sentence dressed as salvation. And she accepted not because she wanted him, but because refusal would destroy the people she loved. That first night, the ranch felt colder than usual, the halls longer, the walls listening, and Clara sat alone in the massive bedroom, staring at furniture older than her parents, while Elias remained downstairs, pouring whiskey he barely drank, because despite his reputation, even he knew this marriage was built on something fragile and dangerous. Need, not affection. Days passed and the ranch hands watched closely, expecting cruelty, domination, or humiliation, but instead they saw something unsettlingly quiet. Elias spoke little. Clara worked hard, harder than any woman before her, lifting, feed, repairing fences, riding until her muscles burned, because work was the only place where her fear loosened its grip. And slowly the men of Black Hollow began to respect her, not as the rancher's wife, but as a force they couldn't ignore. Elias noticed too from a distance how she carried herself, how she never complained, how she stood tall even when exhaustion bent her spine. And for the first time in decades, something unfamiliar stirred inside him, not desire but recognition, because Clara Bell carried pain the same way the land did, quietly, permanently, without asking permission to exist. One evening, as the sun bled across the plains, Elias finally spoke plainly, telling her the truth without softness or cruelty, that this marriage was about the future, about ensuring Black Hollow did not die with him. And Clara listened without interruption, because she already knew, and when she answered, her voice steady but distant, she said she would do her duty, but she would not surrender her soul. And something in that sentence lodged itself in Elias's chest like a splinter. The town whispered, waiting for scandal, for collapse, for proof that the old rancher had gone mad. But instead weeks turned into months, and something unexpected happened. The ranch began to change, not through force but through balance. Clara brought order where Elias brought authority, compassion where he brought discipline, and the workers noticed that the land responded. Crops steadied, livestock calmed, and even the wind seemed kinder, as if Black Hollow had accepted her. At night, Clara lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how long duty could survive without love, while Elias sat in his study reading old journals, realizing that for the first time, the future didn't feel like a deadline but a possibility. And though the reason for their marriage hung between them like a shadow, neither crossed a line, because some boundaries once broken could never be rebuilt. Tension lived in the silence, heavy and unresolved, not physical but emotional. Two lives bound by necessity, learning each other through restraint rather than touch. And the audience watching this story unfold would feel that pressure in every unspoken word, every look avoided, every shared meal eaten quietly across a massive table. Then came the night of the storm, when thunder cracked the sky and a fence collapsed near the ravine, and Clara rode out alone to fix it, refusing help. Because proving herself had become instinct, and when her horse slipped, sending her crashing into the mud, Elias followed despite his age, despite the pain in his knees, because fear for her safety struck him harder than he expected, and when he found her injured but alive, soaked and furious, something finally broke, not into desire, but into honesty, because in that rain, with lightning tearing the sky apart, they stood not as rancher and bride, but as two wounded survivors who understood loss too well. That night marked the beginning of a shift, subtle but irreversible, where respect replaced obligation, where care replaced command, and where legacy slowly transformed from obsession into responsibility. As Clara healed, Elias softened, not weakly but wisely, sharing stories of his past, his failures, his regrets, and Clara listened, realizing that behind the legend was a man terrified of leaving nothing behind, and the audience would feel that transformation deeply, because this was not a love story born of romance, but of endurance, understanding, and time. And as the chapter closes with the ranch standing strong beneath a rising sun, viewers are left with a powerful question. Can something built on necessity grow into something meaningful? And can two people bound by fate rewrite what destiny demanded of them? The second winter at Black Hollow Ranch arrived heavier than the first, not because of the snow, but because of the expectations pressing silently against the walls of the house, the land and the people who lived upon it. And Clara felt it every morning when she woke before dawn, her breath fogging the cold air as she dressed, knowing that time was no longer neutral. It was watching her, judging her, waiting, because the town had stopped, whispering about whether Elias Crow would leave a legacy and had begun asking when, and though no one dared speak it openly in front of her, the question followed her everywhere, in the eyes of the ranch hands, in the careful politeness of visiting neighbors, and most of all, in the quiet pauses during meals when Elias stared too long into his cup. Elias himself felt the weight differently, like a slow tightening around the chest, because age did not move backward, and the ranch, for all its strength, could not inherit itself. And there were nights when he lay awake listening to the wind and wondered if he had made a mistake marrying duty, without considering the cost of forcing the future to obey his fear. Clara tried to bury the pressure beneath work, riding longer routes, taking on heavier tasks, refusing rest, because stillness invited thoughts she wasn't ready to face. Thoughts about whether her life would ever truly belong to her again, or whether it had already been spent the moment she agreed to wear the Crow name. The tension between them grew thicker, not because of cruelty or anger, but because both knew what stood unspoken between them, and neither wanted to be the one to turn it into words, because words would make it real, and reality demanded decisions that could not be undone. Then the accident happened, the kind that ranchers feared more than storms or drought. When a prized stallion panicked during a supply run and trampled one of the younger hands, leaving the boy broken and bleeding in the snow, and Clara reacted without hesitation, directing men twice her size, stabilizing the injured worker, riding through freezing winds to fetch the doctor herself. And when it was over, the ranch saw her not as a bride or a symbol, but as a leader, and Elias saw something else too. A future that did not need domination to survive. However, leadership came at a cost, because respect bred resistance from those who felt threatened, and a group of neighboring ranchers, long jealous of Crowland, began circling like wolves, spreading rumors that Elias was weakening, that his bride ran the ranch because he no longer could, and when one of them confronted Clara openly in town, mocking her role and questioning her purpose, something inside her finally cracked, not into rage but resolve, because she realized that silence had protected her once, but now it endangered everything. That night she confronted Elias directly, her voice calm but unyielding, telling him that if the ranch was to survive, it needed honesty. Not avoidance. And Elias, exhausted by years of control, finally listened without defending himself, admitting that his fear of dying without a legacy had driven him to make choices without considering the human cost. And for the first time he asked, not commanded, what she wanted. Clara's answer was not simple, because her wants had been buried under survival for too long, but she spoke anyway, saying she wanted respect, choice, and truth, not promises shaped by desperation, and that if the future was to exist, it had to be built together or not at all. The days that followed were tense but transformative, as Elias began transferring real authority to her, involving her in decisions, treating her not as an instrument of continuation but as a partner in preservation, and the ranch responded, stabilizing in ways it hadn't in years, while the townspeople began to realize that Black Hollow was no longer ruled by fear, but by balance. Yet balance did not erase the ticking clock, and when Elias collapsed one morning from exhaustion and age, Clara felt a terror she hadn't expected, kneeling beside him in the dirt, realizing that somewhere between obligation and survival, she had come to care deeply for the man everyone else saw only as a legend. And as he recovered slowly, weaker but clearer, he made a decision that stunned everyone, rewriting his will, not to secure blood alone but to secure continuity through stewardship, placing Clara at the center of Black Hollow's future regardless of what fate delivered. This decision enraged his enemies, who escalated their pressure, attempting land grabs, legal threats, and intimidation, forcing Clara to stand firm in courtrooms and council halls where women like her were never meant to win, and she did not through aggression, but through preparation, truth, and unwavering presence. As winter broke and spring returned, the ranch stood stronger than before, not because a legacy had been guaranteed, but because it had been redefined. And in the final moments of the chapter, Elias and Clara stand together overlooking the land at sunrise, knowing that whatever the future brings, inheritance, sacrifice, or loss, it will no longer be dictated by fear alone, leaving the audience with a powerful realization that legacy is not always born. Sometimes it is chosen, earned, and defended with everything one has.